What if the very air you breathe was actually a medium for a silent, invisible war? To understand the Amazon, you must first unlearn everything you know about light and shadow. Here, the sun is not a constant companion. It is a fractured, struggling entity, fighting its way through 1,000 layers of chlorophyll and decay. This is the Emerald Labyrinth, a world where the sky is not blue, but a shifting mosaic of deep jade and suffocating obsidian. As we descend from the heights of the emergent layer, the atmosphere changes. The humidity rises, thick enough to swallow sound, creating a pressurized silence that feels heavy against the skin. In this realm, the canopy acts as a biological ceiling, a dense, interlocking web of lianas, epiphytes, and massive hardwood branches that can reach heights of 60 meters. It is a structural masterpiece, but for the inhabitants below, it is a labyrinth of tactical advantages and fatal blind spots. The sensory experience here is overwhelming. There is the scent of damp earth, the pungent aroma of decomposing organic matter, and the sweet, cloying smell of night-blooming orchids. But beneath these layers lies something more primal, the scent of adrenaline. In the Amazon, every breath is a data point. Every shift in the wind carries a chemical message, a warning of a predator's approach or the frantic pheromones of a wounded animal. In this dim, filtered light, the concept of visibility becomes a weapon. We often think of the jungle as a place of chaos, but it is actually a place of extreme, calculated stillness. The light that manages to pierce through the canopy creates sun flecks, small, dancing patches of brilliance on the forest floor. To a casual observer, these are beautiful. To a hunter, they are tactical opportunities. To the prey, they are deadly spotlights. Notice the complexity of the verticality. Life in the Amazon does not just move left and right, it moves up and down. A capybara may graze on the riverbank, while a harpy eagle watches from 100 feet above, and a jaguar prowls the mid-story, moving through the shadows with a ghost-like fluidity. This three-dimensional battlefield means there is no such thing as a safe direction. A predator can emerge from the leaf litter, from the canopy above, or from the murky depths of a flooded forest floor. Even the acoustics are deceptive. The dense vegetation causes sound to refract and bend. A snap of a twig might sound like it's coming from 10 feet away when the source is actually 30. This acoustic camouflage is a fundamental part of the ecosystem's design. It allows the predator to mask its footfalls, but it also provides the prey with a narrow, often unreliable window for detection. As the light begins to fail, the shadows in the canopy take on a new, more sinister meaning. The transition from day to night in the Amazon is not a gradual fade, but a tactical shift in the war. As the diurnal creatures retreat to their nests, the nocturnal specialists emerge. The shadows do not just hide the inhabitants, they become an extension of them. In this emerald twilight, the line between the living organism and the forest itself begins to blur. The war is not coming. It is already here, woven into the very fabric of the shadows. But if the forest is the battlefield, then there is one creature that does not merely fight within its boundaries, it dictates them. To understand the sheer scale of this conflict, we must look toward the architect of the hunt. Not an architect of stone or wood, but one of biological engineering and calculated dominance. Enter the jaguar, Panthera onca. While many see a mere predator, the jaguar is something far more profound. It is the keystone that holds the entire structural integrity of the Amazon together. To call it a king is an understatement. It is the engineer of the ecosystem's very limits. Look closely at its form. It is a masterpiece of evolutionary optimization. Unlike the lions of the African savanna, which rely on the sheer speed of a high-speed pursuit across open plains, the jaguar is a specialist in the art of the close-quarters combat. Its body is compact, densely muscled, and built for explosive, short-range power. This is a creature designed for the claustrophobic density of the undergrowth, where there is no room for a long chase. Only the sudden, violent execution of an ambush. But its true genius lies in a biological anomaly that separates it from almost every other big cat on Earth. While most felids are designed to deliver a suffocating bite to the throat, the jaguar has evolved a specialized cranial strength that allows it to bypass the traditional rules of engagement. Its bite force is disproportionately massive relative to its size, capable of exerting pressures that can puncture the thick, bony skulls of caimans or the impenetrable shells of Matamata turtles. It does not just hunt, it deconstructs the defenses of its prey. This ability to penetrate biological armor makes the jaguar a unique variable in the evolutionary equation. It is the predator that can turn even the most heavily defended organisms into vulnerable targets. Even its coat tells a story of sophisticated geometry. The rosette patterns on its fur are not merely beautiful, they are a form of disruptive coloration. These patterns break up the animal's outline, making it nearly impossible for the eye to distinguish the predator from the flickering sun flecks and chaotic shadows we discussed earlier. The jaguar does not just hide in the shadows, it becomes a part of the light and dark interplay itself. Furthermore, the jaguar is a master of the fluid boundary. It is one of the few truly semi-aquatic apex predators, possessing a physiological comfort in the water that most terrestrial hunters lack. This allows it to exert pressure across multiple domains, land, river, and flooded forest, effectively closing off any safe zones the prey might attempt to utilize. In this sense, the jaguar is the ultimate regulator. By selecting which species thrive and which populations are thinned, it prevents any single group from overwhelming the forest's resources. It is a heavy hand, yes, but it is a necessary one. Without the jaguar to prune the excess, the delicate web of the Amazon would unravel into a chaotic collapse. It is the silent director of the jungle's symphony, a shadow that moves with purpose, ensuring that the war for survival continues to follow the ancient, necessary laws of life and death. But if the jaguar is the architect of this battlefield, who, then, are the inhabitants of the terrain it so ruthlessly regulates? To look into the undergrowth is to realize that the Amazon is not a singular stage, but 1,000 overlapping layers of desperation. Beneath the cathedral-like canopy, the light becomes a fractured, emerald haze, and within this dim, humid twilight, a diverse cast of characters exists in a state of perpetual, high-stakes gambling. This is not a world of leisure. It is a world of intense, metabolic pressure. The prey of the Amazon are not merely victims, they are specialists in the art of not being found. Consider the capybara, the world's largest rodent. While they appear sluggish, almost heavy with contentment, they are actually highly tuned sensory machines. They possess a unique physiological adaptation for survival in the flooded forests. Their eyes, ears, and nostrils are positioned high on their heads, much like a hippopotamus. This allows them to remain almost entirely submerged, breathing and watching, while appearing to nothing more than a ripple in the water. They are masters of the liminal space, the thin, dangerous line between land and river. Further into the tangled vines, the hierarchy of survival shifts from size to subtlety. Here, we find the peccaries, armored pig-like creatures that move in disciplined, chaotic units. Unlike the solitary jaguar, peccaries utilize a strength in numbers strategy that borders on a collective intelligence. When a predator approaches, they don't just run. They communicate through high-frequency vocalizations and sudden, synchronized movements that can confuse a hunter's ability to lock onto a single target. They are a moving wall of muscle and tusks, a living shield for the individual. But the undergrowth hides even more sophisticated defensive technologies. Deep in the leaf litter, the war is fought on a microscopic scale. Small mammals, like the agouti, have evolved a high-octane metabolism and a frantic, erratic running pattern designed to exploit the search image of a predator. By moving in unpredictable, zigzagging bursts, they force the jaguar to constantly recalculate the geometry of an attack, wasting the predator's precious energy reserves. Even the insects and reptiles contribute to this complex defensive web. Some prey species have mastered chemical warfare, secreting toxins that make them unpalatable or even lethal, turning the act of predation into a potential suicide mission for the hunter. Others utilize disruptive camouflage that is even more advanced than the jaguar's own, mimicking the very veins of a leaf or the texture of decaying bark so perfectly that they become invisible even from a distance of a few inches. This is the reality of the undergrowth, a dense, multi-layered labyrinth where every organism is a walking contradiction. Every creature is simultaneously a seeker of nutrients and a target of destruction. In this crowded, claustrophobic space, there is no such thing as a safe niche. Every scent trail is a potential death sentence, and every rustle of a leaf is a question of life or death. The undergrowth is a crowded theater of evolutionary ingenuity, where the prey are constantly rewriting the rules of engagement, trying to stay one step ahead of the shadow that is always, inevitably, closing in. But if the undergrowth is a theater of constant ingenuity, what is the fundamental logic that governs this chaos? What are the invisible, unyielding laws that dictate who breathes today and who becomes part of the forest floor tomorrow? In the Amazon, survival is not governed by morality, but by a brutal mathematical economy. To understand this war, one must understand the three immutable laws of the jungle: the law of energy, the law of detection, and the law of the threshold. First, there is the law of energy, the metabolic ledger that every living thing must balance. In this humid furnace, every movement is a transaction. For the jaguar, a failed hunt is not merely a disappointment, it is a physiological deficit. A large predator requires a massive caloric intake to maintain its muscle mass and thermoregulation. If a jaguar spends too much energy chasing a phantom or a miss strike, it enters a state of negative energy balance, where it begins to consume its own tissues just to keep its heart beating. Conversely, for the prey, the law is even more unforgiving. An agouti that spends too much time running from false alarms will exhaust its glycogen stores, leaving it too weak to escape the actual predator. In the Amazon, the most efficient killer and the most efficient hider are not just the strongest. They are the ones who manage their energy most ruthlessly. Then there is the law of detection, the sensory arms race. This is a game of information asymmetry. The predator seeks to minimize its signal, the noise, scent, and visual disturbance it produces, while the prey seeks to maximize its detection threshold. This is a battle fought in the frequencies of the unseen. It is not just about sight, it is about the chemical signature of fear. When a prey animal is stressed, its adrenal glands flood its system with cortisol, which can actually alter its scent profile, making it more detectable to a jaguar's highly sensitive olfactory bulb. Evolution has responded with a countermove. Many species have developed scent masking behaviors or rely on the dilution effect, where being part of a large group reduces the statistical probability of any single individual being detected. Finally, there is the law of the threshold, the razor's edge between life and death. In biology, this is known as the escape window. It is the precise, microsecond interval between the moment a predator commits to an attack and the moment the prey can initiate a flight response. If a jaguar strikes a second too late, the prey escapes. If the prey perceives the threat a millisecond too late, the hunt is over. This threshold is shaped by the environment itself. In the dense thickets, the threshold is narrow because there is no room for error. In the open riverbanks, the threshold expands, allowing for a pursuit. These are the invisible boundaries of the emerald labyrinth. They are the silent constraints that force every creature, from the smallest rodent to the apex jaguar, to become a specialist in efficiency. There is no room for waste. There is no luxury of error. In this ecosystem, the rules are written in blood, and the only way to stay within the lines is to master the art of the struggle. The stage is set, the laws are in effect, and the players are already moving. In a world where the air itself is heavy, with the scent of impending death, how do you live when your very existence is a signal for destruction? To live in the Amazon is to exist in a state of perpetual, high-stakes surveillance. For the inhabitants of the Emerald Labyrinth, there is no such thing as true peace. There is only the temporary absence of a threat. This is a landscape where silence is not an absence of sound, but a tactical tool, and where a single misplaced footfall can trigger a cascade of fatal consequences. This is a world of constant vigilance. For the prey, vigilance is a physiological mandate. It is not merely a behavioral choice, but a relentless neurological demand. Many species have evolved what biologists call hypervigilant phenotypes. Take, for instance, the capybara. They do not simply inhabit the riverbanks, they monitor them. Their sensory processing is tuned to detect the microdisturbances in the environment, the slight ripple of water that defies the wind, or the subtle shift in the canopy's light that suggests a heavy body moving through the shadows. This vigilance is taxing. Constant monitoring keeps the nervous system in a state of sympathetic arousal, maintaining high levels of baseline adrenaline. While this prepares them for an instant burst of speed, it comes at a biological cost. Chronic stress can suppress immune function and reduce reproductive success. In the Amazon, the price of staying alert is often the very health required to sustain life. But the jaguar, the master of this theater, operates on a different frequency of awareness. While the prey monitors the environment for changes, the jaguar monitors the environment for patterns. The jaguar does not just see the forest, it reads it like a complex, living map of vulnerabilities. Its vigilance is characterized by low-impact observation. It utilizes its rosette-patterned coat to break up its silhouette, allowing it to remain motionless for hours, becoming a part of the static background. This is more than camouflage. It is a form of sensory integration. The jaguar listens for the alarm calls of other species, a phenomenon known as interspecific eavesdropping. When a howler monkey screams or a macaw takes flight in sudden, unprovoked panic, the jaguar doesn't see a disturbance, it sees a dinner bell. It interprets the frantic vocalizations of its neighbors as a real-time data stream, pinpointing the exact location of a panicked herd. The battle of vigilance is also fought in the realm of the unseen, the olfactory landscape. In the dense, humid air of the jungle, scent molecules linger, creating a chemical map that never resets. A prey animal must navigate this map with extreme caution, often utilizing scent avoidance, roots, or pausing to ensure their own chemical trail hasn't become too prominent. Conversely, the jaguar uses its vomeronasal organ, the Jacobson's organ, to taste the air, detecting microscopic pheromones and hormonal shifts in the wind. It can sense the chemical signature of a prey animal's fear before it even lays eyes on the target. In this theater of shadows, vigilance is the only currency that matters. It is a grueling, 24-hour cycle of sensory input and rapid-fire decision-making. To blink is to risk death. To miss a scent is to lose a meal. In the Amazon, the eyes, the ears, and the nose are never truly at rest. They are the front line of a war that never sleeps. But where does this sensory warfare actually meet? Beneath the canopy, there exists a threshold that no physical map can chart, a phantom line known as the invisible boundary. It is not a fence of wood or wire, but a psychological and biological frontier where the realm of the seeker meets the realm of the sought. It is the razor-thin margin between a successful hunt and a missed opportunity, and it is perhaps the most volatile territory in the entire Amazonian ecosystem. This boundary is defined by the limits of perception. It is the exact distance at which a jaguar's stealth is neutralized by a peccary's sense of smell, or the precise moment a tapir's ears catch the snap of a twig that was supposed to be silent. To cross this boundary is to enter a state of irreversible momentum. For the predator, crossing it means the transition from observation to execution. For the prey, it is the moment when suspicion turns into the frantic, kinetic reality of flight. Interestingly, this boundary is not static. It breathes and shifts with the environment. During the heavy rains of the wet season, the boundary expands. The acoustic dampening of the falling water creates a sensory shroud, allowing the jaguar to penetrate deeper into the territory of its prey before being detected. The heavy humidity acts as a medium for scent, blurring the chemical lines and making the olfactory boundary unpredictable. Conversely, in the dry season, the boundary tightens. The forest floor becomes a minefield of brittle leaves and dry twigs, turning the jungle into a high-sensitivity tripwire, where the margin for error shrinks to millimeters. There is also a profound neurological component to this threshold. Biologists have observed that prey animals often inhabit what is known as a landscape of fear. This is a cognitive boundary where the mere possibility of a predator's presence dictates movement patterns. Even if a jaguar is miles away, the invisible boundary of its influence can be felt. Prey species will avoid certain, high-risk corridors, dense thickets, or narrow river crossings, not because they have seen a predator, but because the perceived risk has crossed their internal threshold of safety. They are effectively living in a ghost map of the jaguar's potential locations. For the jaguar, the boundary is a matter of energetic economy. Every failed stalk is a wasted expenditure of precious calories. To cross the boundary too early is to trigger an alarm. To cross it too late is to lose the kill to a competitor or the element of surprise. The jaguar must master the geometry of the gap, that fleeting window of time where the predator is close enough to strike, but still far enough to remain a ghost. This invisible line is the true front line of the Amazonian war. It is the silent, tension-filled space where millions of years of evolution are tested every single hour. It is the point where instinct meets action, and where the question of survival is answered with a single, decisive movement. Beyond this line, there is no more room for observation. There is only the hunt or the escape. What if the most lethal weapon in the Amazon isn't a claw or a tooth, but the ability to become nothing? Once the invisible boundary is crossed, the war shifts from a psychological game of shadows into the most disciplined display of physical control in the natural world, the silent stalk. This is not merely walking. It is a masterclass in biomechanical deception. To the untrained eye, the jaguar is a heavy, muscular predator, but in motion, it becomes a fluid extension of the forest floor itself. The jaguar employs a specialized gait known as pacing, where the hind paw lands almost precisely in the footprint left by the forepaw. This is not an accident of movement, but a calculated evolutionary strategy. By stepping into its own tracks, the jaguar minimizes the disruption of the leaf litter and reduces the acoustic signature of its approach. It is essentially walking in its own shadow, smoothing out the chaotic vibrations that would otherwise signal its presence to the sensitive mechanoreceptors in the feet of a capybara or a deer. But the stealth goes deeper than just footfalls. The jaguar's coat, a complex tapestry of rosettes, serves as a sophisticated form of disruptive coloration. Unlike the uniform camouflage of many animals, these irregular patterns break up the animal's physical outline. In the dappled light of the Amazonian understory, where sunlight filters through the canopy in inconsistent, high-contrast patches, the jaguar's body ceases to look like a solid object. To a prey animal, the jaguar does not look like a predator. It looks like the shifting play of light and shadow on a rotting log or a cluster of ferns. As the predator closes the distance, it engages in what biologists call micropositioning. This involves the constant, almost imperceptible adjustment of its center of gravity. The jaguar uses its powerful, low-slung musculature to distribute its weight so effectively that it can traverse even the most treacherous terrain, sloping riverbanks or tangled root systems, without triggering the acoustic tripwires of the jungle. It is a slow, agonizingly patient process. A jaguar may spend hours moving mere meters, waiting for the precise moment when the wind direction shifts or the prey's attention wavers. This patience is fueled by a unique neurological discipline. While the prey animal is often locked in a state of hypervigilance, their nervous systems are primed for sudden, explosive movement. The jaguar operates in a state of suppressed arousal. It must suppress its own predatory drive to prevent sudden muscular twitches or changes in breathing patterns that could be detected by the acute olfactory senses of its target. In this phase of the hunt, the jaguar is playing a game of thermal and chemical invisibility. It avoids the prevailing wind to ensure its scent trail is carried away from the prey, and it utilizes the natural, white noise of the jungle, the buzzing of insects or the distant call of a bird, to mask any infinitesimal sound it might make. The stalk is a high-stakes mathematical equation. The jaguar is calculating the precise trajectory required to reach the strike zone without triggering the prey's flight response. It is a dance of inches, a slow-motion invasion of a victim's personal space. The tension is palpable. The predator is a ghost, moving through a world of sensors, trying to reach the point where the shadow finally becomes a reality. But what happens when the shadows move from the forest floor into the murky depths of the river? In the Amazon, the boundary between land and water is not a wall, but a gateway. And for the jaguar, it is a tactical advantage that few other big cats can claim. While most felids view water as an obstacle to be avoided, the jaguar has evolved to treat the river systems as an extension of its hunting grounds. It is not merely a visitor to the water's edge. It is a master of the riparian zone, a semi-aquatic specialist capable of turning a liquid landscape into a lethal hunting corridor. This mastery begins with a physiological distinction. Unlike the leopard, which is strictly terrestrial, or the tiger, which is a formidable swimmer, the jaguar possesses a specialized skeletal density and muscular distribution that allows for incredible buoyancy control and explosive propulsion in the water. This allows it to transition from a silent stalk on the mud to a powerful hydrodynamic strike in a single, seamless motion. The river's edge is a high-traffic zone, a biological crossroads where the prey is often at its most vulnerable. Here, the jaguar targets species that are physiologically optimized for the water, yet remain acutely aware of the land. Consider the caiman, the armored predator of the river. To most, the caiman is the master of the shallows, but the jaguar has developed a specialized hunting technique to bypass this living armor. Instead of the traditional throat bite used on terrestrial mammals, the jaguar utilizes its most terrifying evolutionary trait, its cranial piercing bite force. The jaguar possesses the strongest bite force relative to body size of all the big cats, reaching pressures capable of puncturing the thick, osteoderm-reinforced skin of a caiman's skull. It is a surgical strike designed to bypass the armor and reach the central nervous system instantly. This is not a struggle of attrition. It is a high-speed execution facilitated by a predator that understands the physics of the kill better than its prey understands the dangers of the water. The hunt often takes place in the liminal space, the muddy, unstable transition between bank and current. Here, the jaguar utilizes a unique hunting posture. It will often submerge itself almost entirely, leaving only its nostrils and eyes above the waterline, utilizing the silt and floating vegetation as a natural shroud. This is a form of low-profile ambush that exploits the optical properties of the water. In the tea-colored, tannin-rich rivers of the Amazon, visibility is notoriously poor. The jaguar uses this turbidity as a weapon, turning the water into a veil that hides its massive silhouette until it is within the strike zone. Even the prey's sensory advantages are neutralized. Many aquatic prey, such as the capybara, rely on high-frequency vibrations and scent to detect danger. However, the jaguar has learned to move through the water using low-drag movements, minimizing the displacement of water molecules that would trigger a capillary wave detection in a nearby rodent. In this aquatic theater, the jaguar is a phantom. It bridges two worlds, navigating the heavy resistance of the water with the same grace it exhibits on the forest floor. It reminds us that in the Amazon, survival is not just about strength. It is about the ability to dominate the very elements that define the landscape. When the line between earth and water blurs, the jaguar is the only one who truly knows where they meet. But even when the jaguar leaves the river behind, the transition back to the forest floor does not signal a return to simplicity. To understand the jaguar is to understand that a hunt is not a chaotic burst of violence, but a precise calculation of physics, angles, and momentum. This is the geometry of the attack. Once the predator has closed the distance, the hunt ceases to be about stealth and becomes a matter of pure, lethal mathematics. The jaguar does not simply run at its prey. It executes a trajectory designed to minimize the target's reaction time. This is known as the intercept path. Unlike a cheetah, which relies on a high-speed pursuit along a linear plane, the jaguar operates in a three-dimensional combat zone. It must account for the uneven topography of the jungle floor, the tangled roots, the decaying leaf litter, and the sudden dips in the terrain, all while calculating the exact moment to convert its forward momentum into a vertical or lateral strike. The most critical variable in this equation is the strike zone. For a jaguar, the ideal kill is not achieved through a chase, but through the sudden collapse of the space between predator and prey. As the jaguar lunges, it utilizes a phenomenon called vector summation. It combines its horizontal sprinting speed with a powerful, explosive leap, directing its entire body mass toward a singular point of impact. This isn't just a leap, it is a kinetic projectile. By the time the prey perceives the movement, the jaguar has already occupied the space where the prey intended to move. This brings us to the most specialized aspect of their predatory geometry, the angle of the bite. While most felids are programmed by evolution to target the soft tissue of the throat to induce suffocation, the jaguar's geometry is fundamentally different. It is a specialist in cranial destruction. To achieve this, the jaguar must position its head at a precise perpendicular angle to the prey's skull. This alignment is crucial. If the strike is off by even a few degrees, the force is dissipated across the bone rather than penetrating it. The jaguar's jaw mechanics are a marvel of evolutionary engineering. It possesses a highly specialized temporalis muscle, the muscle responsible for closing the jaw, which is disproportionately large, allowing for a rapid, high-pressure snap. When the jaguar strikes, it isn't just biting. It is driving its canines through a specific geometric corridor designed to bypass the protection of the skull and pierce the braincase or the cervical vertebrae. This is a point source application of force, where hundreds of pounds of pressure are concentrated into the microscopic surface area of a single tooth tip. Even the prey's defensive geometry is part of this calculation. A deer or a tapir will attempt to use evasive maneuvering, changing their velocity and direction to break the predator's line of sight and intercept path. But the jaguar counters this with predictive tracking. It does not aim for where the prey is. It aims for where the prey will be in the next half second. It is a high-stakes game of spatial forecasting, played out in the shadows of the undergrowth. In this microscopic window of time, the difference between a successful kill and a missed opportunity is measured in centimeters and milliseconds. The jungle is not just a battlefield. It is a laboratory of motion, where the jaguar is the ultimate mathematician of death. But what happens when the mathematics of the hunt fail, and the predator is detected before the first strike is ever thrown? In the high-stakes theater of the Amazon, survival is often decided long before a single muscle twitches in pursuit. It is decided in the air. While we often focus on the visual, the flicker of a golden ear or the shadow of a moving limb, the jungle is governed by a much more primal, invisible medium, the chemical landscape. This is the realm of chemosensory warfare, where the very air carries the blueprints of life and death. For the prey, the most terrifying weapon in the jaguar's arsenal isn't its teeth or its claws, it is the scent of its approach. When a predator moves through the undergrowth, it isn't just displacing air, it is shedding a molecular signature. Every movement, every heavy breath, and every bead of sweat releases volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, into the humid jungle atmosphere. To a human, this might be nothing more than the smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation. But to a capybara or a peccary, these molecules are a siren song of impending doom. This is where we encounter the biological phenomenon of olfactory priming. When a prey animal detects the scent of a predator, its brain doesn't just register a smell. It triggers an immediate systemic physiological shift. The detection of specific predator-derived molecules, often found in the jaguar's saliva or skin oils, activates the amygdala, the ancient emotional center of the brain. This bypasses conscious thought, initiating a sympathetic nervous system cascade. Before the prey even sees the jaguar, its heart rate spikes, its pupils dilate, and its body is flooded with glucocorticoids, stress hormones that prepare its muscles for an explosive, desperate flight. But the war of scents is not a one-way street. The jaguar, too, is a master of chemical reconnaissance. It utilizes its highly developed vomeronasal organ, also known as Jacobson's organ, to taste the air. By performing a flamen response, a subtle curling of the upper lip, the jaguar can draw scent molecules into this specialized sensory structure. This allows the cat to detect not just the presence of prey, but its biological state. It can sense the hormonal shifts in a female tapir or the weakened immune signature of an aging deer. The jaguar isn't just smelling an animal, it is reading its chemical biography. Yet there is a dark irony in this chemical warfare. The very scent of fear, the pheromones released by a prey animal in a state of extreme distress, can act as a beacon. When a single herbivore is gripped by terror, it releases alarm pheromones that serve as a chemical broadcast to the rest of the herd. This is a survival mechanism, a way to trigger collective vigilance. However, for the predator, this scent is a roadmap. It marks the exact location of the most vulnerable individual in the group. In this emerald labyrinth, the air is never truly empty. It is a dense, swirling soup of information, a silent battlefield of molecules where a single inhaled breath can mean the difference between a narrow escape and a fatal end. The hunt may be a matter of geometry, but the awareness of the hunt is a matter of chemistry. In the Amazon, fear doesn't just have a feeling, it has a smell. But what happens when the scent of fear is no longer enough to warn the victim, and the battleground shifts from the invisible molecules in the air to the crushing weight of the absolute black? As the sun dips below the canopy, the Amazon undergoes a profound sensory transformation. The vibrant colors of the daylight world bleed into a monochromatic void, and the rules of engagement change. In this realm of shadows, the war for survival is no longer fought through smell or sound alone. It becomes a high-stakes duel of optical engineering. To the human eye, the jungle floor at midnight is a wall of nothingness. But for the jaguar, the darkness is a window. This is due to a specialized biological marvel known as the tapetum lucidum. Located behind the retina, this reflective layer acts as a biological mirror, bouncing light back through the photoreceptors a second time. It effectively doubles the animal's ability to capture every stray photon of moonlight or starlight filtering through the leaves. When you see a pair of glowing orbs reflecting in the brush, you aren't just seeing eyes. You are seeing the physical manifestation of an evolutionary advantage that turns the night into a hunting ground. However, the jaguar does not hold a monopoly on vision. The prey animals of the Amazon have engaged in a desperate, millions of years long counter-evolution to combat this nocturnal advantage. Many species have developed eyes positioned differently on their skulls to optimize their survival. While the jaguar's eyes are placed forward for binocular vision, allowing for the precise depth perception required to calculate a lethal strike, many prey species, such as the deer or the capybara, have evolved lateral eye placement. This provides them with a panoramic field of view, allowing them to detect the slightest movement in their periphery without even turning their heads. But there is an even more specialized tactic at play: the mastery of scotopic vision and the management of visual noise. In the dense undergrowth, shadows are not static. They flicker with the movement of leaves and the shifting of wind. To survive, prey animals have developed an extraordinary sensitivity to motion rather than detail. They don't need to see the jaguar's spots. They only need to detect the disruption in the pattern of the dark. This creates a cognitive arms race of signal versus noise. The jaguar must move with a fluidity that minimizes its visual silhouette, blending its rosette patterns into the dappled, low-light environment, a phenomenon known as disruptive coloration. Meanwhile, the prey must filter out the noise of the moving jungle to find the signal of the predator. Even more fascinating is the phenomenon of dark adaptation. A prey animal that has been grazing in the dim twilight must undergo a physiological transition to see in the deep night. This involves the chemical regeneration of rhodopsin, a light-sensitive pigment in the rods of the retina. If a jaguar strikes during this transition period, when the prey's eyes are still chemically adjusting to the plummeting light levels, the predator gains a momentary, decisive window of visual supremacy. In the pitch-black heart of the Amazon, sight is a deceptive weapon. It is a game of light, reflection, and perception, where the ability to see a shadow before it moves determines who eats and who becomes the meal. In this darkness, the eyes are not just organs of sight, they are the primary sensors in a silent, nocturnal war of attrition. But what happens when the visual duel ends, and the distance between predator and prey vanishes into a single, explosive moment of violence? When the jaguar finally commits, it is no longer a ghost in the shadows. It is a kinetic force of nature. This is the climax of the hunt, the moment where all the evolutionary engineering, the camouflage, the night vision, and the silent stalk converges into a singular, devastating event. We call it the strike, but for the victim, it is the sudden, incomprehensible end of their world. Unlike the lions of the African savanna, which often target the soft tissue of the throat to induce suffocation, the jaguar has evolved a much more specialized and arguably more brutal method of execution. While most big cats are throat biters, the jaguar is a skull breaker. This is due to the incredible mechanical advantage of its craniofacial structure. The jaguar possesses the highest bite force quotient of any felid relative to its size. Its skull is shorter and more robust than that of a leopard or a lion, allowing for a more efficient transfer of force from the massive temporalis muscles directly into the jaw. As the jaguar lunges, it doesn't just bite. It drives its weight forward, utilizing the massive muscles of its neck to pin the prey. The target is rarely the windpipe. Instead, the jaguar aims for the most vulnerable point of the skeletal system, the temporal bones or the base of the skull. With a single, precision-guided snap, the jaguar's canines, which can reach lengths of nearly 2 inches, pierce through the cranium, driving directly into the brain or severing the spinal cord at the atlas vertebra. This is a neurostrike. It causes an instantaneous cessation of all biological functions. There is no struggle, no prolonged agony, and most importantly for the predator, no risk of the prey fighting back and causing injury to the jaguar. This specialized killing bite is an evolutionary response to the unique challenges of the Amazon. In a jungle teeming with high-risk prey, such as the armored caiman or the thick-skinned peccary, a throat bite might be ineffective or even dangerous. A jaguar hunting a caiman must bypass heavy osteoderms, the bony plates of the reptile's skin. To do this, the jaguar often targets the back of the skull or the soft tissue behind the neck, using its sheer force to crush through bone and reach the central nervous system. This strike is also a masterclass in physics. The jaguar must account for the escape velocity of its prey. If the strike is even a fraction of a second late, or if the angle of the jaw is off by a few degrees, the prey may slip into the dense undergrowth, turning a certain kill into a failed pursuit that could leave the predator starving. The fatal strike is the ultimate expression of the jaguar's role as the apex architect of this ecosystem. It is a moment of terrifying efficiency, where millions of years of selective pressure are compressed into a few milliseconds of bone-crushing power. In this instant, the silent war of shadows is resolved. The tension of the hunt evaporates, replaced by the heavy, visceral reality of the kill. The predator has won its battle for survival, but in doing so, it has once again reinforced the brutal, beautiful equilibrium of the emerald labyrinth. But if the skull-crushing strike is the ultimate resolution of the hunt, one must ask, how did the combatants arrive at this final, violent confrontation? To understand the outcome of the fight, we must look deeper than the kill itself and examine the fundamental biological trade-offs that define every living thing in this jungle. This is the great biological compromise, a constant, high-stakes tension between the strength of armor and the grace of agility. In the evolutionary theater of the Amazon, survival is rarely about being the best in a general sense. It is about being the most specialized for a specific niche. This creates a divergent arms race where every defensive innovation by the prey triggers a counter-innovation in the predator. On one side of this spectrum, we find the masters of armor. Consider the caiman, a reptilian tank that has patrolled these waterways for millions of years. Its skin is not merely a covering, it is a complex mosaic of osteoderms, bony plates embedded within the dermis that act as a biological suit of mail. For a jaguar, a caiman is not just a meal, it is a tactical puzzle. The caiman's strategy is to minimize vulnerability, relying on high-density mineralized tissue to deflect teeth and claws. This is passive defense. It requires little energy to maintain, but it comes at a cost. Such heavy armament often limits the creature's metabolic efficiency and restricts the speed of its movements, making it a slow-moving fortress. Yet, as the caiman builds its walls higher, the jaguar builds a bigger ram. The jaguar's evolution hasn't just been about muscle, but about the physics of penetration. It is a biological response to the very existence of armor. On the opposite side of the spectrum lies the realm of agility. For the capybara, or the various species of monkeys that inhabit the canopy, armor is a luxury they cannot afford. Instead, they have invested their evolutionary budget into neurological speed and kinetic evasion. Their survival depends on a hyperreactive nervous system and a musculoskeletal structure optimized for explosive, multidirectional movement. This is the agility paradox. To be fast, you must be light. To be light, you must be fragile. A capybara can outmaneuver a jaguar in a dense thicket, utilizing a high power-to-weight ratio to execute sudden, unpredictable bursts of speed. But this agility is a high-maintenance lifestyle. It requires immense caloric intake to fuel a metabolism capable of such rapid acceleration, and it leaves the animal with almost zero margin for error. One stumble, one moment of hesitation, and the lack of physical protection becomes a death sentence. This is the core of the Amazonian arms race, a perpetual cycle of defense versus offense. When a prey species develops a thicker hide, the jaguar evolves a more concentrated bite force. When the prey develops faster reflexes, the jaguar evolves more sophisticated stealth to negate that speed advantage. It is a zero-sum game played across generations. There is no permanent winner in this biological struggle, only a temporary advantage. The armor provides a shield, but the agility provides a ghost. As these two strategies push against one another, they refine the very essence of life in the jungle, ensuring that only the most specialized, the most efficient, and the most relentlessly adapted can continue the dance. But what if the greatest advantage in the jungle isn't found in how fast you can run, but in how much you can afford to lose? This brings us to the most confounding contradiction in the evolutionary struggle, the speed paradox. In a world where the jaguar is a master of the short-distance sprint, one might assume that the ultimate survival strategy is to simply be faster. But in the dense, claustrophobic architecture of the Amazon, raw velocity is often a trap. To understand this, we must look at the physics of the jungle floor. In a vast, open savanna, speed is king. An animal can reach its maximum velocity and maintain it. But the Amazon is not an open stage. It is a labyrinth of buttress roots, fallen mahogany trunks, and tangled lianas. In this environment, linear speed is almost useless. If a prey animal relies solely on sprinting, it will inevitably collide with an obstacle, breaking its stride and providing the jaguar with the window it needs to strike. This creates a biological dilemma. Do you invest in velocity or maneuverability? Consider the peccary, a pig-like mammal that travels in tight-knit groups. The peccary does not possess the lung capacity for a sustained, high-speed chase, nor does it have the long, slender limbs of a cursorial runner. Instead, it has evolved for burst agility. Its skeletal structure is compact, designed to facilitate rapid, chaotic changes in direction. It doesn't run away from the jaguar, it runs through the chaos. By prioritizing high-frequency, low-distance movements, the peccary forces the jaguar into a game of geometric complexity. The predator, built for a powerful, lunging strike, must constantly recalibrate its trajectory. For the jaguar, every sudden turn the prey makes is a tax on its kinetic energy. However, this specialization comes with a hidden biological cost known as the metabolic tax. High-speed maneuverability requires an incredibly high density of fast-twitch muscle fibers. These fibers are explosive and powerful, but they are notoriously inefficient. They burn through glycogen stores at an astronomical rate and produce lactic acid almost instantly. A prey animal optimized for agility lives on a knife's edge. It can survive 100 sudden turns, but if it cannot find high-quality forage to replenish its depleted glucose levels immediately after the chase, it will succumb to metabolic exhaustion. In the Amazon, the price of being quick is a constant, desperate hunger. Even more fascinating is the sensory speed paradox. Speed is not just about how fast muscles move, it is about how fast information travels. For many of the jungle's smaller prey, such as certain rodent species, the evolutionary race has shifted away from the limbs and into the nervous system. They have developed hyperacute auditory and tactile receptors that allow them to perceive the microvibrations of an approaching predator before the predator is even visible. Their survival depends on a neurological overclocking, the ability to process a threat and initiate a motor response in milliseconds. This creates a strange equilibrium. The jaguar must be fast enough to close the gap, but the prey must be fast enough to perceive the gap closing. It is a race not just of flesh and bone, but of processing power and energy management. In the speed paradox, the winner is not necessarily the fastest creature, but the one that best manages the devastating cost of its own movement. If speed is a gamble and agility is a tax, then what remains when the race is over and the combatants are face to face? If you cannot outrun the shadow, you must become an instrument of destruction or a fortress of biological engineering. This is the realm of weaponized anatomy, where the evolutionary arms race shifts from the mechanics of movement to the terrifying physics of impact. In the Amazon, every tooth, every claw, and every specialized protrusion is a highly tuned tool, forged by millions of years of lethal trial and error. For the jaguar, evolution has bypassed the standard feline blueprint. Most big cats, such as the lion or leopard, utilize a suffocation kill, using their canine teeth to pierce the throat and compress the windpipe. But the jaguar has taken a more visceral, mechanical approach. It possesses the highest bite force quotient of any felid relative to its size, capable of exerting pressures that defy traditional feline biology. This isn't just about strength, it's about specialized architecture. The jaguar's skull is shorter and more robust, providing a massive surface area for the attachment of the temporalis muscles. This allows for a crushing, rather than clamping bite. But the true masterstroke of jaguar anatomy lies in its dental positioning. While other predators target the soft tissue of the neck, the jaguar is capable of a rare and devastating maneuver, the cranial pierce. Its canines are thick and reinforced at the base, designed to bypass the thick hide of caimans and the armored shells of turtles. With a single, calculated strike, the jaguar can drive its teeth directly through the temporal bone of a skull or the cervical vertebrae of a prey animal, instantly severing the spinal cord. In the jungle, the jaguar doesn't just hunt, it performs a surgical strike of overwhelming force. Yet, for every predator armed with a piercing strike, the prey has responded with its own biological armory. This is not merely a matter of size, but of specialized, often bizarre, defensive adaptations. Consider the capybara, the world's largest rodent. While it lacks the ferocity of a predator, its anatomy is a study in survival through durability. Its skin is exceptionally thick and leathery, acting as a primitive form of organic armor that can deflect glancing blows from claws. But look closer at the more specialized combatants, like the various species of armadillos that skirt the edges of jaguar territory. They have turned their very skeletal structure into a mobile shield. Their osteoderms, bony plates embedded within the skin, create a segmented, flexible carapace that is nearly impossible for a predator to penetrate without risking injury to its own mouth. Then there are the weapons of deterrent. In the undergrowth, many species have traded mobility for chemical or mechanical defense. Some insects and amphibians utilize aposematism, using bright colors to signal that their very skin is a weapon of neurotoxins. Others, like certain species of peccary, have evolved tusks that are not just for foraging, but are jagged, self-sharpening blades meant for lateral slashing during a group defense. This is the biological reality of the Amazonian war, a constant cycle of innovation. As the jaguar develops a more powerful bite to crack a skull, the prey evolves a thicker hide or a more impenetrable shell. It is a relentless, silent escalation of hardware, a world where your very body is a weapon, and the cost of a design flaw is immediate, permanent extinction. But if biology provides the hardware of this war, what happens when the battle moves beyond the physical? What occurs when the predator's strength meets a prey animal that simply refuses to be caught? We are entering the most elusive battlefield of all, the cognitive landscape. In the Amazon, survival is not merely a contest of muscle and bone, but a high-stakes game of mental chess. This is the intelligence factor, a hidden layer of the evolutionary arms race where the weapon of choice is not a claw or a tooth, but the ability to perceive, predict, and manipulate. For the jaguar, intelligence is a tool of tactical economy. To hunt in the dense, chaotic clutter of the rainforest is to operate in a world of sensory overload. A jaguar cannot afford to chase every shadow. It must be a master of spatial reasoning and pattern recognition. Studies of large felids suggest a sophisticated ability to map their territory, not just as a series of landmarks, but as a mental grid of high-probability kill zones. They possess a remarkable capacity for predictive modeling, the ability to anticipate where a prey animal will emerge from the thicket based on the subtle geometry of the terrain. A jaguar doesn't just see a capybara. It calculates the most efficient trajectory to intercept that animal's inevitable path. This is cognitive calculation masquerading as instinct. But the prey are not passive victims waiting for a tactical error. They are active problem solvers. The intelligence of the Amazonian prey is often a study in deception and collective cognition. Consider the social complexity of the peccary. When threatened, a herd of peccaries does not simply scatter in a panic, which would make them easy targets for individual pick-offs. Instead, they engage in complex, coordinated defensive maneuvers. They use confusion tactics, moving in synchronized, swirling patterns that exploit the jaguar's visual processing limits. By creating a moving wall of bodies, they force the predator to make a split-second decision. Do I strike one and risk the others goring me, or do I retreat? This is a form of collective intelligence, where the group functions as a single, calculating organism to negate the predator's individual superiority. Then, there is the subtle, deceptive intelligence of the cryptic species. Many prey animals have evolved more than just camouflage. They have developed behavioral counterintelligence. Some species have learned to utilize sensory masking, intentionally moving through water or heavy leaf litter to dampen the acoustic signature of their approach, effectively hacking the jaguar's auditory perception. Others exhibit vigilance shifting, a sophisticated behavioral pattern where individuals in a group rotate the responsibility of scanning the environment, ensuring that there is never a gap in the collective radar. In this theater of war, information is the most precious currency. A single moment of miscalculation, a missed scent, a misunderstood movement, or a failure to predict a flank can mean the difference between a feast and a famine. The jaguar's ability to solve the puzzle of the jungle is matched, strike for strike, by the prey's ability to rewrite the rules of the game. This is the silent, cerebral engine of the Amazon. A war fought not just in the blood and the dirt, but in the lightning-fast synapses of the living. But what happens when the battlefield shifts from the individual to the collective? If intelligence is the weapon, then social structure is the ultimate fortification. In the dense, claustrophobic corridors of the Amazon, the jaguar is a solitary ghost, a master of the singular strike. It operates in isolation, its survival dependent on its own prowess. But for many of its targets, the answer to the predator's lethal efficiency is not to run faster, but to stand together. This is social warfare, a biological phenomenon where the strength of the many overrides the power of the one. The most striking example of this is seen in the complex hierarchies of the white-lipped peccary. These are not merely groups of animals, they are highly organized political units. Within a peccary sounder, there is a sophisticated division of labor that functions as a living shield. While the group forages, certain individuals, often the more experienced elders, occupy the periphery, acting as sentinels. They engage in what biologists call socially mediated vigilance. They don't just watch for movement. They communicate the nature of the threat through a nuanced vocabulary of grunts and squeals, allowing the core of the herd to react with a unified, instinctual precision. When a jaguar makes its move, the peccary response is a masterclass in coordinated chaos. They utilize a tactic known as mobbing, where the group turns its collective aggression toward the predator. By surrounding the jaguar and charging in unison, they exploit the predator's greatest weakness, its need for a clean, low-risk kill. A jaguar is an apex predator, but it is also a risk manager. It cannot afford a broken tooth or a deep wound from a frantic, biting herd. The social cohesion of the peccary effectively raises the cost of entry for the hunt, often forcing the jaguar to abandon a perfectly viable meal in favor of a safer target. We see a different kind of social defense in the canopy among the primates. Capuchin monkeys utilize alarm calling as a sophisticated early warning system. This isn't just a scream of terror, it is a coded language. Research suggests that different vocalizations can convey specific information, distinguishing between an aerial threat like a harpy eagle and a terrestrial threat like a jaguar. This allows the troop to employ specific escape geometries, climbing higher to avoid the ground predator or huddling into the dense interior of the foliage. This shared information network creates a distributed sensory web, effectively turning the entire troop into a single, multi-eyed organism that is nearly impossible to surprise. Even in the smaller corners of the jungle, sociality serves as a biological shield. Certain species of social insects and small mammals utilize dilution effects, where the sheer density of individuals in a group mathematically reduces the statistical probability of any single individual being the victim. It is a grim, numbers-based strategy of survival. In this theater of conflict, the jaguar is fighting a war against an invisible, shifting wall. It is not just hunting an animal, it is attempting to dismantle a system. As the predator seeks to isolate a single link in the chain, the prey responds by forging that chain into an unbreakable bond. It is a struggle where the solitary genius of the hunter meets the overwhelming, organized power of the many. But what if the true battlefield isn't found in the physical clash of tooth and claw, but in the microscopic, silent code that dictates every movement they make? If social structures are the fortifications of the prey, then the DNA is the blueprint of the war itself. We are moving beyond the immediate theater of the hunt and entering a realm where the casualties aren't measured in blood, but in alleles and mutations. This is the genetic toll, the profound, invisible cost of an eternal arms race. Every time a jaguar successfully executes a kill, it is not merely feeding, it is performing a brutal act of biological editing. Through the process of selective pressure, the predator acts as a filter, systematically removing specific genetic sequences from the population. The individual that was a fraction of a second too slow, the peccary with a slightly less acute sense of smell, or the capuchin with a less distinct alarm call, these are the blueprints that are deleted from the future. This is natural selection in its most uncompromising form. The jungle does not care for the almost successful, it only recognizes the survivor. But this pressure does not just sculpt the prey, it exerts a relentless, reciprocal force on the jaguar. This is the Red Queen hypothesis in action, a concept in evolutionary biology which suggests that organisms must constantly adapt and evolve simply to maintain their relative fitness against ever-evolving antagonists. The jaguar cannot afford to remain static. If the prey develops a more sophisticated vocal warning system, the jaguar must evolve more acute auditory processing or more profound stealth. If the prey develops thicker hide or more aggressive social mobbing, the jaguar's musculature and jaw mechanics must respond. It is a biological treadmill where both sides are running at full speed just to stay in the same place. However, this constant drive for perfection comes with a hidden biological price. High-intensity selection can lead to a phenomenon known as a genetic bottleneck. When a predator becomes too efficient, it can drastically reduce the population of a prey species, stripping away much of its genetic diversity. A population with low genetic variance is a fragile one. It lacks the evolutionary toolkit necessary to survive sudden shifts, such as a new disease or a changing climate. In their quest to outrun the jaguar, These animals may inadvertently be coding themselves into a corner of genetic homogeneity. Even within the jaguar, the toll is evident. The extreme specialization required to be an apex ambush predator, the massive skull, the specialized carnassial teeth, the intense metabolic demands of a high-protein diet creates a high-stakes biological gamble. These highly specialized traits are magnificent, but they are also rigid. A jaguar evolved for the dense undergrowth of the Amazon may find its genetic toolkit woefully inadequate if its habitat shifts into more open terrain. We are witnessing a silent molecular dialogue. Every hunt is a data point, every death is a discarded instruction. The war in the Amazon is a continuous loop of trial and error, written in the language of nucleotides. It is a process that builds masterpieces of adaptation, but it is also a process that demands a constant, heavy tribute of life to fuel the engine of change. The struggle for survival is not just a fight to live another day. It is a relentless, microscopic struggle to remain relevant in a world that is constantly rewriting the rules. If the genetic code is the blueprint of this war, then what is the purpose of the destruction? To the untrained eye, the jaguar is a bringer of death, a shadow that leaves nothing but silence in its wake. But in the grand, intricate architecture of the Amazon, death is not the end of a story. It is the fuel for a much larger one. We must shift our perspective from the individual tragedy of the hunt to the magnificent, terrifying equilibrium of the whole. We are looking at the jaguar not as a killer, but as the keeper of the balance. In ecology, we speak of a phenomenon known as a trophic cascade. It is a concept that explains how a single change at the top of the food chain can ripple down through every layer of the ecosystem, fundamentally altering the landscape itself. Without the jaguar, the Amazon would not find peace. It would descend into a chaotic, green desert. Consider the herbivore populations, the capybaras, the deer, and the various species of peccary. Without the constant, predatory pressure of the jaguar, these populations would undergo a demographic explosion. This sounds like a triumph for the prey, but it is actually a death sentence for the jungle. An unchecked number of herbivores leads to overgrazing, a state where the consumption of seedlings and forest floor vegetation outpaces the plant's ability to regenerate. When the herbivores strip the understory bare, the very foundation of the rainforest begins to crumble. The soil, no longer anchored by a dense web of roots, begins to erode under the relentless tropical rains. The shade disappears, the humidity drops, and the microclimates that support millions of insects, amphibians, and birds vanish. By hunting the prey, the jaguar is inadvertently protecting the trees. It is a paradox of nature. The predator's teeth are the guardians of the forest's growth. But the jaguar's influence extends even further into the very economy of the forest floor. This is the scavenger's economy. A single kill by a jaguar is a massive injection of nutrients into a localized area. The remains of a hunt, the discarded bone, the sinew, the marrow, become a vital resource for a secondary tier of life. From the bone-crushing strength of specialized beetles to the opportunistic scavengers like vultures and even certain species of fungi, the jaguar's waste is the lifeblood of the decomposers. This nutrient cycling ensures that the energy captured from the sun by the trees is eventually returned to the earth, completing a closed loop of biological recycling. Furthermore, the jaguar acts as a silent auditor of biological health. In any population, there is an inevitable presence of the infirm, the aged, and the genetically compromised. By disproportionately selecting these individuals, the jaguar performs a critical service. It prevents the spread of zoonotic diseases that could otherwise decimate an entire species. It is a brutal, necessary sanitation process that keeps the gene pool vigorous and the herds resilient. The jaguar is the conductor of a silent, sprawling symphony. It does not play the melody, but its presence dictates the tempo, the rhythm, and the very survival of every instrument in the orchestra. To understand the Amazon, one must realize that the predator is not an intruder in this system. It is the mechanism that prevents the system from collapsing under its own weight. The war is not meant to be won. It is meant to be sustained. What if the true wealth of the Amazon isn't found in its living giants, but in the leftovers of its fallen? While the Jaguar strike is a sudden, violent crescendo, the aftermath is a slow, methodical redistribution of energy, a complex, hidden marketplace that operates beneath the canopy. This is the scavenger's economy. In the high-stakes theater of the rainforest, nothing is truly lost. It is merely reassigned. When a jaguar completes a hunt, it rarely consumes the entirety of its prize. Even the most efficient apex predator must leave a biological footprint. These remains, the scraps of meat, the discarded hides, and the heavy bones, act as high-density nutrient depots in an environment where resources are often fiercely contested. This waste is, in reality, a massive windfall for a specialized class of opportunists. Enter the first tier of the economy, the necrophagous specialists. In the humid heat of the Amazon, decomposition is not a slow decay, but a rapid-fire chemical reaction. Insects, particularly certain species of sylphid beetles and specialized flies, arrive almost instantly. These are not mere scavengers, they are the forest's primary processors. They break down complex proteins into simpler forms, accelerating the return of nitrogen and phosphorus to the soil. But the economy runs deeper than the insect world. We often think of scavengers as large, charismatic animals, but in the Amazon, some of the most vital players are microscopic. Fungi and bacteria engage in a silent, invisible siege upon the carcass, converting organic matter into bioavailable minerals. This process is essential because, in the highly competitive soil of the rainforest, nutrients are notoriously difficult to retain. Without this rapid recycling, the vital elements captured by the prey would be washed away by the torrential rains, locked forever in dead tissue rather than fueling new life. Even the bones themselves serve as a form of biological currency. As the soft tissue vanishes, the skeletal remains become a microhabitat. Small rodents and even certain reptiles may utilize the hollows of larger bones for shelter, while the calcium leaching from the bone marrow provides a critical mineral supplement to the surrounding flora. There is also a darker, more competitive side to this economy, the battle for the carcass. The scent of a kill acts as a biological siren, attracting a hierarchy of scavengers. From the opportunistic vultures circling the canopy to the smaller, more secretive mammals lurking in the shadows, every participant is engaged in a frantic race against time and their competitors. This competition ensures that the carcass is processed with maximum efficiency, leaving no energy behind. In this way, the jaguar's kill acts as a localized wealth injection. It moves energy from the mobile, living world of the herbivore into the sedentary, foundational world of the decomposer. The predator creates the capital, and the scavengers spend it, ensuring that the forest's currency, the essential elements of life, is constantly recirculated. To witness a carcass in the Amazon is not to witness a scene of waste, but to observe a high-speed transaction. The death of one individual provides the metabolic foundation for hundreds of others. In the scavenger's economy, the end of a life is the ultimate investment in the continuity of the whole. But what happens when the ripples of a single death travel far beyond the site of the kill, altering the very architecture of the forest itself? To understand the true scale of the jaguar's influence, we must look past the immediate feast and observe the trophic cascade, a biological phenomenon where the presence of a predator triggers a domino effect that reshapes the entire landscape. This is not just a story of who eats whom. It is a story of how the fear of being eaten dictates the shape of the jungle. Consider the herbivores, the capybaras, the deer, and the peccaries. In a world without the jaguar, these populations would not simply flourish, they would explode. Without the pressure of predation, these grazers would congregate in massive numbers, turning their relentless hunger toward the forest floor. This leads to a phenomenon known as overgrazing, a silent ecological catastrophe. They would strip the understory of its saplings, consume the seedlings of the great mahogany and Brazil nut trees, and effectively halt the forest's ability to regenerate. By hunting these animals, the jaguar acts as an invisible gardener. By keeping herbivore numbers in check, the jaguar indirectly protects the next generation of the canopy. The predator's presence creates a landscape of fear, a psychological boundary that forces prey to remain mobile. Prey animals cannot linger in one lush clearing for too long. They must constantly move, constantly scan, and constantly adapt. This movement prevents any single area from being depleted of its vegetation, ensuring a patchwork of varying plant ages and densities that allows for maximum biodiversity. The consequences even reach the soil and the water. When jaguars regulate the populations of large herbivores, they regulate the amount of nutrient runoff entering the Amazonian river systems. Excessive herbivore density leads to massive amounts of waste and soil compaction, which can destabilize riverbanks and alter the chemical composition of the water. A healthy jaguar population ensures that the flow of nutrients from the land to the water remains balanced, supporting everything from the smallest river shrimp to the massive pink river dolphins. This is the profound irony of the Amazonian War. The predator, often viewed as a force of destruction, is actually a primary driver of structural complexity. A forest with jaguars is a forest of diverse heights, varying plant species, and stable soil. It is a forest that can breathe and grow. In the scientific community, we call this top-down control. It is the mechanism by which the apex predator sits at the top of a complex pyramid, exerting a downward pressure that stabilizes every level beneath it. If you remove the jaguar, the pyramid does not just shrink, it collapses. The herbivores multiply, the plants vanish, the soil erodes, and the very lungs of the planet begin to fail. The hunt, therefore, is not merely a struggle for calories. It is a regulatory pulse. Every time a jaguar strikes, it isn't just ending a life, it is recalibrating the entire ecosystem. The kill is the catalyst, the movement of the prey is the reaction, and the resulting cascade is the very force that keeps the emerald labyrinth from turning into a barren wasteland. The war for survival is, in its most beautiful and terrifying sense, the mechanism of life itself. But if the jaguar is the architect of the landscape, then what of the biological integrity of the inhabitants themselves? To the casual observer, the jaguar's kill looks like a senseless tragedy, a life snuffed out in a moment of violence. But if we look closer, through the lens of evolutionary biology, we see that the jaguar is performing a grim yet essential surgical procedure on the herd. It is not merely a killer, it is a biological filter. In any dense, competitive ecosystem like the Amazon, a population of herbivores is constantly under siege from invisible enemies: parasites, slow-moving pathogens, and the inevitable toll of genetic drift. Within a herd of capybaras or a troop of peccaries, there are always individuals who are slightly slower, slightly weaker, or carrying a heavy load of debilitating parasites. In a world without the jaguar, these individuals would survive longer, consuming precious resources and, more dangerously, acting as reservoirs for disease. This is where the selection pressure of the jaguar becomes a vital force for health. The jaguar does not hunt by chance, it hunts by efficiency. It targets the outliers. It seeks the animal that lacks the quickness to react, the one whose gait is slightly uneven, or the one whose senses have been dulled by infection. By disproportionately culling the sick, the elderly, and the genetically compromised, the jaguar effectively sanitizes the population. This process is a form of natural, purifying selection. When a predator removes the weakest links, it ensures that only the most resilient genes are passed on to the next generation. The survivors of a jaguar encounter are, by definition, the elite. They are the fastest, the most alert, and the most robust. This constant, high-stakes pressure forces the entire species to undergo a continuous biological upgrade. It accelerates the pace of evolution, weeding out deleterious mutations before they can become widespread within the gene pool. Furthermore, there is a phenomenon known as the dilution effect, but the jaguar forces its prey to find a more active way to survive. In a healthy ecosystem, the presence of a predator prevents pathogen spillover. When prey populations become too dense and stagnant, the rate of intraspecies contact skyrockets, allowing viruses and bacteria to sweep through a herd like wildfire. By keeping population densities below this critical threshold, the jaguar prevents these explosive outbreaks, acting as a natural quarantine officer for the entire jungle. Even the way prey interacts with their environment changes to maintain this health. The landscape of fear we discussed earlier forces animals to avoid stagnant, high-risk areas where disease often lingers in the damp undergrowth. They are pushed toward fresher, more diverse foraging grounds, which in turn provides them with a more varied diet, strengthening their immune systems. So, when we witness a hunt, we must look beyond the blood and the bone. We are witnessing the maintenance of biological excellence. The jaguar is the hand that prunes the dying branches so that the tree may grow stronger. It is a brutal, uncompromising, and necessary ritual. Without this constant pressure, the herds would not just grow, they would decay from within, becoming slow, sickly, and genetically stagnant. The war for survival ensures that life, in all its complexity, remains at its absolute peak. But if the jaguar is the architect of the landscape, then what of the microscopic battlefields hidden beneath the fallen leaves? While the heavyweights of the Amazon, the jaguars and the tapirs, engage in a visible, high-stakes theater of violence, a far more insidious conflict is unfolding at a scale almost invisible to the naked eye. We often think of the jungle as a stage for the large and the powerful, but the true engine of the ecosystem is fueled by 1,000 microwars, occurring simultaneously in the leaf litter, the soil, and the very bloodstreams of the inhabitants. In the shadow of the great predators, a silent struggle for biological dominance is waged by the decomposers and the pathogens. When a jaguar leaves behind the remains of a kill, it is not merely providing a meal for scavengers. It is triggering a massive, microscopic mobilization. Fungi, bacteria, and specialized insects descend upon the carcass, engaging in a frantic race to break down complex proteins and recycle them back into the nutrient cycle. This is a war of chemical warfare, microbes secreting enzymes to dissolve tissue, while other organisms deploy antibiotics to protect their territory from rival colonies. Without this microscopic carnage, the Amazon would choke on its own success. The nutrients locked within the bodies of the fallen would remain trapped, creating a biological bottleneck that would eventually starve the very trees that provide the jaguar its cover. But the microwar extends beyond the carcass and into the living tissue of the prey itself. Within every capybara, every peccary, and every lizard, a private war is being fought between the host's immune system and a relentless army of parasites. This is not a passive existence. It is a constant, metabolic struggle. Consider the complex life cycles of various Amazonian helminths, parasitic worms that must navigate the digestive tracts and circulatory systems of their hosts. To survive, these parasites have evolved sophisticated molecular mimicry, essentially wearing the host's own proteins as a disguise to evade detection. This internal conflict is a critical component of the larger evolutionary arms race. A prey animal that cannot manage its internal microwar becomes a liability to its herd. An animal burdened by a heavy parasitic load, lacks the energy reserves required for the explosive bursts of speed needed to escape a jaguar. In this way, the microwar and the macrowar are inextricably linked. The parasite weakens the host, the jaguar identifies the weakened host, and the cycle of selection is completed. Even the soil itself is a battlefield. The rhizosphere, the narrow zone of soil surrounding plant roots, is a site of intense microbial competition. Bacteria compete for exudates released by plants, while predatory protozoa hunt the bacteria. This microscopic struggle dictates the availability of nitrogen and phosphorus, which in turn determines the density of the vegetation, which ultimately determines how much cover a jaguar has for its next ambush. In the Amazon, nothing is truly still. The violence of the jaguar's bite is merely the most visible expression of a much deeper, more pervasive reality, a world of constant, multi-layered combat. From the apex predator to the single-celled organism, every inhabitant is a soldier in a relentless struggle for resources, space, and survival. The jungle is not just a forest. It is a continuous, escalating series of wars, fought on every scale imaginable. If every death is a catalyst and every cell is a battlefield, then what is the final result of this endless, multi-layered combat? To see the Amazon only as a collection of individual wars is to miss the grander, more breathtaking design. When we step back from the blood, the parasites, and the frantic scramble for nutrients, we begin to perceive something far more profound. We see that this chaos is not random. It is not merely a series of disconnected tragedies. Instead, the violence of the jungle is the very instrument used to compose a masterpiece of biological equilibrium. This is the symphony of survival. In any great orchestra, there must be tension and resolution. There must be loud, percussive strikes and soft, melodic undertones. In the Amazon, the percussion is the sudden, violent strike of a jaguar's paw or the frantic, high-pitched alarm calls of a capuchin monkey. These are the moments of high drama that command our attention. But the melody, the steady, underlying rhythm that keeps the entire system in tune, is the subtle, unseen work of the trophic cascade. Consider the profound influence of a single predator on the very geometry of the forest. When a jaguar hunts, it does more than remove an individual from a population. It reshapes the behavior of the survivors. This phenomenon, known as the ecology of fear, creates a landscape of shifting movements. Prey animals do not graze uniformly. They avoid certain high-risk zones, such as dense thickets or riverbanks where an ambush is most likely. This selective avoidance prevents overgrazing in specific areas, allowing certain plant species to mature, which in turn provides nesting sites for birds and shade for the forest floor. The predator's presence, through the mere threat of death, dictates the architecture of the vegetation. This is the top-down control that prevents the ecosystem from collapsing into a monoculture. Without the jaguar to cull the herds, the herbivores would eventually strip the landscape bare, turning a lush, carbon-sequestering paradise into a barren wasteland. The predator acts as a biological regulator, ensuring that no single species grows so dominant that it suffocates the diversity of the whole. Even the energy itself follows a rhythmic, cyclical flow. The chemical energy captured by a leaf through photosynthesis is transferred to a herbivore, then to a predator, and eventually, through the microscopic wars we have discussed, back into the soil to nourish the next generation of plants. It is a closed loop of exquisite precision. It is a system where death is never a waste, but a reinvestment. In this symphony, there are no villains and no heroes, only players following a script written by millions of years of evolution. The jaguar is not evil for its kill, nor is the prey tragic for its death. They are both essential notes in a complex arrangement. When the predator is healthy, the prey is resilient. When the prey is diverse, the predator thrives. As we move forward, we must realize that this symphony is not a static song. It is a living, breathing composition that is constantly being rewritten. But even the most beautiful music can be silenced if the instruments are broken. And in the Amazon, the instruments are under threat like never before. But what happens when the instruments of this symphony are not just broken, but systematically dismantled? For millions of years, the only true threat to the jaguar was the slow, rhythmic dance of evolution. But today, a new shadow is falling across the Amazon, one that does not move with the grace of a predator, but with the cold, relentless momentum of a machine. This is not a shadow cast by a canopy or a passing cloud. It is the shadow of humanity. We often think of deforestation as a distant, macro event, a massive scar on a satellite map. But for the creatures living within the emerald labyrinth, the encroachment is intimate, visceral, and terrifyingly fast. It begins with the edge effect. As roads carve through the dense jungle and cattle ranches push against the forest's perimeter, the very physics of the habitat change. The deep, humid interior, the jaguar's sanctuary of darkness and stillness, is being bled dry. When a forest is fragmented, the microclimate shifts, the humidity drops, the temperature rises, and the dense undergrowth that once provided the perfect tactical cover for an ambush becomes thin and brittle. The jaguar is losing its invisibility. This fragmentation does more than just shrink the territory. It creates biological islands. For a solitary apex predator like the jaguar, which requires vast, contiguous hunting grounds to maintain a healthy genetic lineage, these man-made barriers are more than just inconveniences. They are dead ends. When a jaguar is forced to cross a road or a pasture to find a mate, it enters a zone of extreme vulnerability. Here, the ecology of fear is replaced by a new, more lethal reality: the conflict of interest. As their natural prey populations fluctuate due to habitat loss, jaguars are increasingly pushed toward the fringes of human civilization. This leads to a desperate, tragic collision. To a starving jaguar, a head of cattle is not a symbol of human industry. It is a concentrated, easily accessible source of protein. But to the farmer, the jaguar is no longer a vital component of the ecosystem. It is a thief, a pest, a threat to their livelihood. This friction often results in retaliatory killings, turning the apex architect into a fugitive in its own kingdom. Furthermore, we must consider the silent, invisible encroachment, the loss of connectivity. Recent studies in landscape genetics suggest that as habitats become islands, the genetic flow between jaguar populations stagnates. This leads to inbreeding depression, a slow-motion biological decay that weakens the very resilience we have spent this documentary admiring. The predator may still be there, stalking the shadows, but it is becoming a ghost of its former self, a creature with a shrinking genome and a diminishing world. The shadow is also moving through the very chemistry of the forest. The introduction of noise pollution from logging machinery and the artificial glare of settlements disrupt the sensory-driven world of the Amazon. In a realm where survival is dictated by the snap of a twig or the faint scent of a capybara, the roar of an engine is a sensory blackout. The symphony is being drowned out. The rhythmic, cyclical flow of life is being interrupted by a discordant, mechanical pulse. We are no longer just spectators of this war. We have become the third combatant, and our presence is changing the rules of survival in ways evolution never prepared these species to handle. Can a kingdom survive when its borders are no longer defined by nature, but by asphalt and wire? As we have seen, the encroachment of humanity is not a singular event, but a process of dissection. We are witnessing the transformation of a continuous, breathing empire into a collection of disconnected shards. In ecology, this is known as habitat fragmentation, and for the jaguar, it is a death sentence written in slow motion. To understand the gravity of this, we must look at the concept of edge effects through a biological lens. When a highway cuts through a primary forest, it doesn't just take up space, it creates a permanent wound. The forest edge is a zone of instability. It is hotter, windier, and significantly drier than the deep interior. For a predator that relies on the heavy, humid stillness to mask its scent and dampen the sound of its footfalls, these new edges are like open floodlights. The jaguar's primary weapon, its invisibility, is being stripped away by the very physics of a changing landscape. But the true catastrophe lies in the creation of biological islands. A single male jaguar requires a territory that can span hundreds of square kilometers to ensure a diverse gene pool. When we introduce cattle ranches, soy plantations, and logging roads, we are effectively building walls around these territories. We are trapping these apex architects in pockets of forest that are too small to sustain them. This leads to a phenomenon known as the extinction debt. It is a haunting biological reality where a species appears to be thriving in a fragment of forest, but is actually already doomed. The current generation of jaguars may be hunting, mating, and surviving, but because the fragments are too isolated, they cannot reach distant populations to exchange genetic material. This leads to a collapse in heterozygosity, the genetic diversity that allows a species to fight off disease and adapt to change. We are watching a slow-motion genetic bottleneck, where the jaguar is being forced into a cycle of inbreeding that weakens its immune system and its very capacity to survive the next environmental shift. Furthermore, fragmentation alters the trophic architecture of the entire region. When the forest is broken, the prey animals respond differently. Certain species, like the capybara or the white-lipped peccary, may thrive in the edge habitats near human settlements, while more specialized forest dwellers vanish. This creates a distorted menu for the jaguar. It is forced to hunt in high-risk, high-reward zones, the fringes where human presence is highest. This is where the biological war meets the economic war. As the jaguar's natural prey becomes harder to find in these shrinking corridors, the predator turns to the only stable biomass left: livestock. This is not a choice made of malice, but of caloric necessity. When a jaguar kills a cow, it isn't just an act of predation. It is a symptom of a broken landscape. This triggers a cycle of retaliatory violence, where the very animals that once maintained the balance of the jungle are hunted to extinction by the people living on its borders. The kingdom is being partitioned. The seamless flow of life, which once moved across thousands of miles of uninterrupted green, is being choked by a web of human boundaries. The jaguar is no longer navigating a labyrinth of vines and shadows. It is navigating a minefield of human interference. What happens when the predator's instinct for survival becomes its greatest liability? When we speak of a conflict of interest, we are not merely discussing a disagreement between man and beast. We are describing a fundamental biological collision. In the heart of the Amazon, the jaguar's evolutionary programming is hardwired for a specific kind of warfare, one that requires vast, uninhibited territories and a predictable rhythm of prey availability. But the modern world has introduced a variable that biology cannot account for: the economic value of life. As the forest fragments, the jaguar is forced into a metabolic crisis. In a pristine ecosystem, a jaguar's caloric intake is balanced by the seasonal migrations of peccaries or the abundance of caiman in the river basins. But in a fragmented landscape, these natural energy sources are often the first to vanish, replaced by the silent, static presence of domestic livestock. To a jaguar, a tethered cow or a grazing herd of cattle is not property. It is a concentrated, slow-moving, and highly accessible packet of calories. It is an evolutionary trap. The predator is biologically compelled to take the path of least resistance to avoid starvation, but in doing so, it enters into a direct collision with human livelihood. This transition from forest hunter to livestock predator creates a phenomenon known as retaliatory killing. Unlike the natural cycle of predation, which serves to prune the weak and maintain the health of a species, human-driven retaliation is a targeted strike against the apex itself. When a rancher loses a calf, the response is rarely a search for a solution. It is often the deployment of poison, snares, or firearms. This creates a sink habitat, an area that looks like suitable territory to a jaguar but functions as a lethal trap. The jaguar enters the zone, finds food, and is subsequently eliminated. But the conflict runs deeper than the physical loss of individual animals. We are seeing a disruption of the landscape of fear. In a healthy jungle, the presence of the jaguar dictates the movement of every herbivore, preventing overgrazing and ensuring that no single plant species is decimated. This is the top-down control that keeps the Amazon breathing. However, as humans remove jaguars through retaliatory killing, this fear vanishes. Without the shadow of the predator, prey populations like the capybara can undergo ecological release, exploding in number and stripping the forest floor of its seedlings. The result is a trophic cascade that can turn a lush jungle into a barren scrubland, fundamentally altering the very soil and canopy that the jaguar needs to survive. We are witnessing a profound misalignment of survival strategies. The jaguar is playing a game that has been perfected over millions of years, but the rules of the board are being rewritten by a species that operates on a timeline of months and fiscal years. The jaguar hunts to sustain a lineage. The human reacts to protect an investment. When these two imperatives meet, the result is a zero-sum game where the biological architecture of the Amazon is the ultimate casualty. The war is no longer about who is the most efficient hunter, but about which species can tolerate the presence of the other. And in this new, fractured world, the jaguar is finding that its greatest enemy is not the prey that escapes, but the environment that no longer recognizes it as a king. But what happens when the enemy you cannot see is not a predator, but a vacuum? If the retaliatory killing of jaguars is a direct strike, then poaching and the resulting loss of genetic diversity represent a slow, invisible erosion, a silent extinction that occurs long before the last animal draws its final breath. In the natural world, death is a loud, visceral event. The snap of a branch, the roar of a struggle, the scent of blood. But the extinction we are witnessing today is quiet. It is a hollowed-out forest where the sounds of life remain. But the biological blueprint of the jungle is being systematically erased. Poaching in the Amazon is rarely about the grand, cinematic hunt. It is often driven by the black market for skins, teeth, and even the biological components used in unregulated traditional medicines. But the true devastation lies in the removal of the genetic elite. In any wild population, the strongest, most resilient individuals are often those that command the largest territories, the very apex individuals that drive the evolutionary arms race. When poachers target these large, dominant males or reproductive females, they aren't just killing an animal, they are performing a forced, artificial selection. They are removing the high-quality genes from the pool, leaving behind a population that is genetically stunted, more prone to disease, and less capable of adapting to a changing climate. This leads us to one of the most terrifying concepts in conservation biology, the extinction debt. It is a mathematical reality where a species may still be present in an area, appearing to be thriving, while it is actually functionally dead. Because the Amazon is being fragmented into isolated islands of green, jaguar populations are becoming trapped in genetic bottlenecks. When a group of jaguars is cut off from the rest of the species by a highway or a soy plantation, they can no longer find unrelated mates. They are forced into inbreeding, a biological death spiral where recessive mutations accumulate, fertility drops, and the immune system collapses. To a casual observer, the jungle looks full of life, but beneath the canopy, the species is already a ghost, merely waiting for the math to catch up with the reality. Furthermore, we must consider the loss of cryptic diversity. The Amazon is home to specialized subspecies and localized populations that possess unique adaptations, perhaps a specific resistance to a local parasite or a subtle variation in hunting technique suited to a particular river basin. As human encroachment continues, these unique evolutionary experiments are being snuffed out. We are losing the very toolkits that nature uses to solve the problems of survival. We are witnessing a transition from a war of strength to a war of attrition. In the past, a jaguar's survival depended on its ability to outsmart a tapir or outrun a caiman. Today, its survival depends on its ability to exist in a landscape that is being stripped of its complexity. The silence in the forest is no longer the silence of a successful ambush. It is the growing, heavy silence of a biological library being burned, page by page, leaving behind a world that is increasingly hollow, increasingly fragile, and increasingly incapable of sustaining the very greatness that once defined it. But what if the very rhythm of the world itself, the predictable pulse of rain and sun, begins to fracture? For millions of years, the war between predator and prey has been choreographed by the seasons. The jaguar and its quarry have evolved to a clockwork rhythm, the predictable arrival of the monsoon floods, the predictable ripening of fruit, the predictable migration of herds. This is the biological metronome of the Amazon. But as the planet warms, that metronome is skipping beats, and the resulting dissonance is throwing an entire ecosystem into a state of physiological shock. We are entering the era of climate chaos, where the traditional rules of engagement are being rewritten by forces that neither the hunter nor the hunted can fight. One of the most insidious shifts is the alteration of the phenological synchrony, the timing of life events. Imagine a jaguar that has perfected its ambush tactics around the seasonal congregation of capybaras at a drying riverbed. Now, imagine a climate where those rivers no longer dry at the expected time, or where extreme, unseasonal droughts force the prey to migrate prematurely into unfamiliar, exposed territories. The predator's map is becoming obsolete. The hunter is moving into a world where the landmarks of opportunity are shifting beneath its paws. This disruption extends deep into the very chemistry of the jungle. The Amazon functions as a massive biotic pump, recycling moisture through transpiration to create its own rain. As deforestation and rising temperatures weaken this pump, we see the rise of savannization, a process where the lush, closed canopy rainforest begins to transition into a dry, open woodland. For a jaguar, this is a catastrophic loss of tactical advantage. The jaguar is a specialist of the shadows. Its entire evolutionary toolkit, its rosette-patterned camouflage, and its explosive, short-burst energy is designed for the high-density, low-light environment of the deep jungle. In a thinning, drying forest, the shadows disappear. The jaguar loses its cloak of invisibility, and the prey species, many of which rely on dense foliage to hide their young, find themselves exposed to a sun that is both a heat stressor and a spotlight for predators. Furthermore, we are seeing the emergence of thermal bottlenecks. Every organism has a thermal neutral zone, a temperature range where they can function without expending massive amounts of energy just to stay cool or warm. As heat waves become more intense and prolonged, prey animals like the peccary or the tapir must spend more time resting in the shade to avoid hyperthermia, leaving them less time to forage. This creates a state of chronic nutritional stress. A malnourished prey animal is easier to catch, which might seem like a boon for the jaguar, but it is a trap for the ecosystem. If the predator overconsumes a population that is already struggling to recover from climate-induced starvation, the entire trophic structure collapses. We are witnessing a breakdown of the evolutionary tempo. Evolution moves in millennia, but climate change is moving in decades. The jaguar and its prey are being forced into a sprint to adapt to a landscape that is changing faster than their DNA can rewrite itself. The war is no longer just about who is faster or stronger. It is a desperate, frantic race against a changing atmosphere, a struggle to find footing in a world that is literally melting away. But what if the most dangerous element in this shifting landscape isn't a change in weather, but a presence that does not belong to the natural order? For eons, the jaguar has been the undisputed master of its domain, a biological masterpiece of stealth and power. But a new shadow is stretching across the Amazon, one that does not move with the grace of a feline or the frantic instinct of a tapir. This is a predator that does not hunt for hunger, nor does it follow the ancient laws of the trophic cascade. It is an unnatural predator, humanity. Unlike the jaguar, which takes only what it needs to sustain its metabolic fire, the human footprint is characterized by a profound, systemic consumption. We are not merely another link in the food web, we are a disruption of the web itself. The primary weapon of this new predator is not a claw or a tooth, but a machine. Where the jaguar relies on the silent stalk, human encroachment brings the cacophony of the chainsaw and the roar of the bulldozer. This introduces a phenomenon known as acoustic masking. In the jungle, sound is a lifeline. Prey animals rely on subtle infrasonic vibrations and high-frequency calls to detect an approaching threat. The relentless, low-frequency drone of human industry creates a wall of noise that effectively blinds the sensory perception of the jungle, rendering the prey's natural early warning systems useless. But the devastation goes deeper than mere noise. We are witnessing the fragmentation of the genetic corridor. In a healthy Amazon, jaguars roam vast, contiguous territories, allowing for a healthy exchange of genetic material that prevents inbreeding and ensures evolutionary resilience. However, as we carve roads and cattle ranches through the emerald heart of the forest, we are creating biological islands. These isolated pockets of habitat trap populations, leading to genetic bottlenecks. When a species can no longer migrate to find diverse mates, its DNA begins to stagnate, making it increasingly vulnerable to disease and the very climate shifts we discussed earlier. We are essentially suffocating the jungle's ability to evolve. Even more insidious is the subtle, invisible pollution of the habitat. It isn't just the visible scars of deforestation, but the chemical and light pollution that bleeds into the wild. Light pollution disrupts the circadian rhythms of nocturnal species. For a jaguar, a creature of the crepuscular and nocturnal hours, the introduction of artificial light from encroaching settlements can desynchronize its hunting cycles, throwing off the hormonal regulation that dictates its peak periods of activity. We have introduced a variable into the Amazonian equation that has no biological precedent. We are a predator that operates outside the cycle of replenishment. We do not participate in the scavenger's economy. We do not leave behind the remains that fuel the next generation of life. Instead, we extract. By disrupting the sensory, genetic, and rhythmic foundations of the forest, we are not just competing with the jaguar, we are rewriting the very definition of survival. The war for the Amazon is no longer just a struggle between the hunter and the hunted. It is a struggle between the ancient, rhythmic pulse of nature and the relentless, accelerating momentum of a species that has forgotten how to be part of the balance. If a forest is stripped of its kings and its corridors are severed, is it truly dead, or is it merely waiting to reclaim itself? We have spent this journey witnessing a landscape under siege, a world where the ancient rhythms of the jaguar and its prey are being drowned out by the mechanical roar of human progress. It is easy, in the face of such systemic disruption, to succumb to the narrative of inevitable collapse. But nature is not a fragile glass ornament. It is a complex, self-correcting engine of radical persistence. Even as we tear at the fabric of the Amazon, the forest is attempting to weave itself back together through processes that are as subtle as they are profound. The first sign of this defiance lies in the phenotypic plasticity of the survivors. Evolution, which we once thought was a slow march of millennia, is being forced into a sprint. We are seeing species adapt their behaviors in real time to navigate the human-altered landscape. Some jaguar populations are beginning to exhibit dietary shifts, learning to exploit the edges of human settlements, while others are developing heightened neophobia, a cautious avoidance of new, artificial stimuli that allows them to navigate the periphery of our world without being detected. This is life's way of recalibrating its sensors, finding new frequencies to survive in a noisy world. Furthermore, the Amazon possesses a remarkable capacity for secondary succession. When a patch of forest is cleared, it does not remain a void. It becomes a battlefield of rapid colonization. Pioneer species, hardy, fast-growing plants with high seed dispersal plasticity, rush to fill the gaps, creating a temporary, chaotic ecosystem that stabilizes the soil and prevents total erosion. These buffer zones act as a biological sponge, attempting to mitigate the heat and moisture loss caused by deforestation. They are the forest's first responders, rushing into the wounds we have carved to prevent the hemorrhage of life. Yet, resilience is not synonymous with invulnerability. While the jungle can heal its skin, it struggles to heal its soul. The deep, interconnected genetic networks that take eons to establish. This is why the concept of biological corridors has become the new frontier of survival. We are learning that to save the jaguar, we cannot simply protect a single patch of green, we must protect the movement of life. By creating wildlife bridges and reforestation strips that reconnect fragmented habitats, we are attempting to facilitate gene flow once more, allowing the isolated biological islands to merge back into a continental whole. The resilience of nature is not a guarantee of its survival, but rather a testament to its will. It is a silent, relentless pressure, a slow-motion pushback against the chaos we have introduced. The Amazon is not merely a victim of our presence. It is an active participant in its own recovery, constantly testing the limits of its endurance. As we stand at this crossroads, the question is no longer whether the jungle can endure, but whether we will allow it the space, the silence, and the connectivity it needs to do so. The war for survival is shifting. It is no longer just a battle of claws and teeth, but a struggle to see if the ancient, regenerative pulse of the earth can outlast the accelerating momentum of man. But what if the solution to this fragmentation isn't found in a single forest, but in the invisible threads that connect them? If we view the Amazon as a collection of isolated islands, we are fundamentally misunderstanding the architecture of survival. For a jaguar, a territory is not a static map. It is a dynamic flow of energy and genetic information. When we build a highway or carve out a soy plantation, we aren't just removing trees, we are creating genetic bottlenecks. These are biological choke points where populations become so isolated that inbreeding depression sets in, stripping the species of the very evolutionary tools it needs to fight the next environmental shift. To prevent this, we must look toward the science of connectivity conservation, the engineering of corridors of hope. These corridors are far more than mere strips of greenery. They are highly specialized ecological conduits designed to facilitate metapopulation dynamics. In a healthy ecosystem, a metapopulation is a group of spatially separated populations of the same species that interact through dispersal. When we establish a corridor, we are effectively re-establishing the rescue effect. This is a critical biological phenomenon where individuals from a thriving population migrate into a declining one, injecting fresh alleles and preventing local extinction. We are essentially providing the jaguar with a lifeline, allowing the king to move between fragmented kingdoms to find mates, new hunting grounds, and a way to outrun its own genetic stagnation. However, designing these corridors is a task of immense complexity. It is not enough to simply plant trees. We must replicate the structural complexity of the original forest. A corridor that lacks the multi-storied canopy architecture of the Amazon becomes a death trap. A narrow, exposed strip where prey animals are easily cornered and jaguars are forced into frequent, fatal contact with human livestock. True corridors must mimic the edge effects of the deep jungle, providing dense undergrowth and reliable water sources to ensure that the movement of life doesn't become a gauntlet of vulnerability. We are now seeing the emergence of stepping stone habitats, small, strategically placed patches of forest that act as rest stops for migrating species. For a smaller predator or a dispersing prey animal, these stepping stones are the difference between successful migration and a terminal journey. This is landscape permeability in action, the degree to which a landscape allows or impedes the movement of organisms. By increasing this permeability, we are attempting to stitch the frayed edges of the emerald labyrinth back into a cohesive tapestry. The implementation of these corridors represents a fundamental shift in how we perceive conservation. It is a move away from fortress conservation, the idea of locking nature behind a fence, toward integrated landscape management. It acknowledges that humans and wildlife must occupy the same continent, but that we must design our world to accommodate the ancient pathways of the wild. These corridors are our attempt to restore the functional connectivity of the Amazon. They are an admission that while we have broken the world, we possess the tools to mend the connections. As these green veins begin to pulse once more with the movement of shadow and scent, we are witnessing a grand, scientific experiment, an attempt to see if human ingenuity can provide the bridge that allows the ancient cycle of predator and prey to continue its eternal, necessary dance. If the survival of a species depends on the ability to move, what happens when the very ground beneath them begins to vanish? We have spoken of corridors and connectivity, of the scientific hope that we can stitch the emerald labyrinth back together. But as we gaze into the horizon of the coming century, we must confront a more haunting possibility, that we are witnessing not just a period of fragmentation, but the final, desperate movements of an ancient era. This is the concept of the last great hunt, a cinematic, tragic, and biologically profound moment where the traditional rules of the Amazon are being rewritten by the shadows of extinction. Imagine a lone male jaguar, a genetic titan carrying the lineage of 1,000 generations. He enters a corridor, a narrow strip of reconstructed canopy, driven by the primal urge to find a mate and expand his territory. But the landscape he navigates is no longer the seamless expanse of his ancestors. It is a novel ecosystem, a hybrid world where natural selection is being outpaced by anthropogenic change. In this new reality, the jaguar is no longer just hunting capybara or caiman. He is hunting against the clock of a shifting climate and a shrinking map. This is the trophic ghost phenomenon. As certain prey species, sensitive to even-minute changes in humidity and forest structure, begin to experience localized extinctions, the jaguar faces a caloric crisis. The energy expenditure required to traverse a fragmented landscape often exceeds the caloric reward of the hunt. This is a mathematical death sentence. When a predator spends more energy searching for food than it gains from consuming it, the optimal foraging theory collapses. The hunt, once a calculated dance of efficiency, becomes a frantic, losing battle against metabolic bankruptcy. Furthermore, we are seeing a shift in the very phenology of the hunt, the timing of biological events. As the Amazon's dry seasons lengthen due to global shifts, the traditional rhythms of migration and breeding are falling out of sync. The prey animals may emerge from their seasonal refugia at different times, than the jaguar's peak hunting cycles. This trophic mismatch creates a silent, invisible war where the combatants are no longer fighting each other, but rather, they are fighting the calendar itself. In these twilight years, the last great hunt takes on a new, darker character. We see the rise of opportunistic predation, where jaguars, pushed to the brink by the loss of wild prey, are forced into the human-dominated matrix. They turn to livestock, not out of choice, but out of biological necessity. This creates a feedback loop of retaliation, where the very animals we are trying to save through corridors become the villains in the eyes of local communities. Yet, even in this precarious twilight, there is a profound biological resilience. The last great hunt is not merely a eulogy, it is a testament to the sheer tenacity of life. Every successful hunt in a fragmented forest, every successful dispersal through a stepping stone habitat is a victory against the odds. We are watching the species attempt to evolve in real time, testing the limits of their plasticity. The question that remains is not whether the hunt will continue, but whether it will continue in a world that still remembers the scent of a deep, unbroken forest, or if the jaguar's final strike will be made in a landscape of ghosts. Can a masterpiece stay beautiful if you begin to pull the threads from its tapestry? We have stood at the precipice of the last great hunt, witnessing the struggle of individual titans against a crumbling world. But to truly understand the tragedy unfolding, we must zoom out. We must look past the individual jaguar and the fleeing peccary to see the invisible architecture that holds this entire realm together, the fragile equilibrium. In ecology, we speak of a steady state, a dynamic stability where life and death are so perfectly intertwined that the system appears unchanging. It is a paradox of motion. The Amazon is not a static museum. It is a violent, churning engine of consumption. Yet, for millions of years, this engine has maintained a precise mathematical balance. This balance is governed by top-down control, where the jaguar acts as the biological regulator, ensuring that no single species can explode in population and strip the forest bare. But equilibrium is not a fixed point, it is a tightrope walk. Consider the concept of functional redundancy. In a healthy Amazon, if one species of prey declines, others step in to fill the niche, preventing the predator from starving and the vegetation from overgrowing. It is a safety net woven from biodiversity. However, as we continue to fragment the jungle, we are not just losing individual animals, we are losing these redundant roles. We are pulling the safety net apart, thread by thread. When a key player is removed, perhaps a specific species of rodent that serves as a primary calorie source for smaller carnivores, it creates a secondary extinction cascade. The loss of one species triggers a domino effect that can collapse entire subnetworks of the food web. This brings us to the stability-complexity debate. For decades, scientists have argued whether a more complex ecosystem is inherently more stable. In the Amazon, complexity is the jungle's greatest defense. The sheer number of interactions, the specialized parasites, the intricate symbiotic relationships, the varied hunting strategies acts as a buffer against change. But there is a breaking point. There is a threshold known as the critical transition. When an ecosystem is pushed past this threshold, it doesn't just degrade slowly, it undergoes a regime shift. It snaps. It can transform from a lush, closed canopy rainforest into a degraded, open canopy savanna in a matter of years. This is not a gradual evolution, it is a systemic collapse. Once the equilibrium shifts, the old rules no longer apply. The jaguar, evolved for the shadows of the deep canopy, finds itself a stranger in a sun-scorched landscape. And the prey, evolved for stealth in the undergrowth, finds no cover in the encroaching scrub. The equilibrium we are witnessing is being stretched to its absolute limit. We are seeing the hysteresis effect, a phenomenon where even if we stop the destruction today, the ecosystem may not return to its original state. The damage is not easily reversible. The path back to the old world is blocked by the scars of the new one. As we move toward the final reflection of this journey, we must ask, is the equilibrium a permanent law of nature, or is it a temporary truce? We are no longer just observers of this balance. We have become the weight on the scale, tilting the world toward a state where the hunt may finally, irrevocably, come to an end. What if the greatest predator the Amazon has ever known is not a creature of claw and tooth, but a creature of concept and consequence? For millions of years, the evolutionary arms race was a closed loop. The jaguar's strength was met by the prey's speed. The prey's camouflage was met by the predator's vision. It was a dialogue written in DNA, a conversation that required no external intervention. But humanity has entered this dialogue, and we are not speaking the language of biology. We are speaking the language of disruption. As we reflect on the shifting scales of this ecosystem, we must confront the reality of our human legacy. It is a legacy not of presence, but of absence. When we clear-cut a corridor of forest for cattle ranching or soy production, we aren't just removing trees, we are inducing genetic bottlenecking. By isolating populations of jaguars into small, disconnected islands of green, we force them into an unintentional experiment of inbreeding. Without the ability to migrate and find new mates, the very genetic diversity that fueled their millions of years of adaptation begins to erode. We are effectively stripping the jaguar of its most potent weapon, its evolutionary potential. But our footprint goes deeper than the soil. We are altering the very chemistry of the hunt. Consider the phenomenon of anthropogenic noise pollution. In a world where silence is a survival mechanism, the low-frequency rumble of chainsaws, heavy machinery, and distant highways acts as a form of sensory warfare. For a jaguar, whose success depends on the ability to hear the subtle rustle of a capybara in the reeds, this acoustic smog is a blinding veil. For the prey, it creates a state of chronic physiological stress, elevating cortisol levels to a point where their reproductive success plummets. We are making the jungle too loud to hunt in and too frantic to live in. Even our most subtle changes trigger the trophic downgrading of the Amazon. When we remove the apex predators through poaching or habitat loss, we trigger a phenomenon known as mesopredator release. Without the jaguar to keep them in check, smaller, mid-sized predators, such as certain species of wild cats or coatis, undergo a population explosion. These mesopredators then decimate the smaller birds, reptiles, and mammals that were previously part of a balanced cycle. The war doesn't end. It simply becomes lopsided, chaotic, and ultimately less resilient. Perhaps most haunting is the biogeochemical legacy. Our influence has reached even the microscopic level. The alteration of the water cycle through deforestation changes the humidity and temperature of the forest floor, shifting the microclimates that specialized prey species rely on for thermal regulation. We are changing the rules of the game while the players are still on the field. We often view ourselves as being outside of nature, as if we are merely spectators watching a drama unfold. But the science tells a different story. We are an invasive variable in an equation that has been balancing itself since the dawn of time. Our legacy is the question we leave behind. Will the Amazon be remembered as a thriving, emerald labyrinth of infinite complexity, or will it be remembered as a ghost system, a collection of empty niches and silent shadows, where the hunt ended not because the animals failed, but because the world they inhabited was rewritten by a hand they could never see? Is it possible that the end of a species is not a sudden explosion, but a slow, silent fading of the light? As we stand at this precipice, looking out over the fragmented remains of the emerald labyrinth, we are forced to confront the most profound truth of the natural world. Nothing in the Amazon is truly finished. The struggle we have witnessed, the sprint of the peccary, the crushing bite of the jaguar, the delicate dance of the trophic cascade, is not a series of isolated events. It is a singular, unbroken thread of existence. This is the eternal cycle. In a pristine world, death is never an end. It is a redistribution of energy. When a jaguar finally succumbs to age or injury, its body does not simply vanish. It becomes a concentrated pulse of nutrients, a resource windfall for the forest floor. The nitrogen and phosphorus locked within its tissues are reclaimed by fungi, then by the roots of the very trees that once sheltered it. This is the profound irony of the jungle. The apex predator, the architect of death, is ultimately the architect of life. The predator's caloric success is the forest's metabolic wealth. But the cycle we are witnessing now is being forced into an unnatural rhythm. In a healthy ecosystem, the disturbance regime, the natural cycle of fire, flooding, and decay is predictable. It allows for recovery, but the human-induced disturbances we have discussed are too rapid, too relentless. We are pushing the Amazon toward a tipping point, a threshold where the forest can no longer generate its own rainfall through transpiration. If the trees fail to breathe, the cycle of moisture breaks. If the moisture breaks, the specialized microhabitats vanish. And if the habitats vanish, the war for survival is lost not by the weak, but by the very ground beneath their feet. We must ask ourselves, can a cycle survive when its fundamental laws are being rewritten? Biologists speak of ecological resilience, the ability of a system to absorb a shock and return to its original state. For millions of years, the Amazon has been the gold standard of resilience. It has survived ice ages, volcanic shifts, and tectonic upheavals. It is a master of the rebound. Yet, resilience is not infinite. There is a limit to how much a system can be stretched before it snaps. We are currently testing the elastic limits of the most complex biological machine on Earth. As the sun sets over the canopy, casting long, golden shadows through the mahogany and ceiba trees, the hunt begins anew. Somewhere in the darkness, a jaguar is moving, its muscles rippling with the same evolutionary perfection that has existed for eons. Somewhere, a capybara is listening, its heart racing with the same ancestral fear. The mechanics of the hunt remain, but the stage is crumbling. The eternal cycle is a testament to the beauty of interdependence, but it is also a warning. It tells us that every life is a debt paid to the next, and every predator is a servant to the prey. We are now part of that debt. The question is no longer whether the cycle will continue, but whether we will allow it to remain a symphony of life, or if we will leave behind a world where the only thing that remains is the silence of a broken loop.